My name is Cora Vance and I am 28 years old. For most of my adult life I have been a ghost, a whisper in the hallowed halls of literature. Tonight that is going to change. Tonight I plan to watch a legacy, built on a foundation of my words and my silence, crumble into dust under the glare of 1,000 camera flashes and a live-streamed global audience. The weapon I chose wasn't a court filing or a tell-all interview. It was a single, perfectly crafted chapter, a narrative key hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to turn it. In a few hours my father, the celebrated author Arthur Vance, will stand on a stage to accept accolades for his latest masterpiece, and a single pointed question about that chapter will be his undoing. It will be the sweetest, most terrifying moment of my life, the moment I finally reclaim my own story. Before I dive into the story of how a daughter's quiet revenge unraveled a literary giant, I want to connect with all of you listening right now. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt unseen or had your contributions dismissed by someone who was supposed to be your biggest champion, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps to know we're not alone in these struggles. And of course, if you're new here, please subscribe to the channel to join our community of storytellers and listeners who understand that sometimes, the most important voice to find is your own. What would you do if the person you admired most in the world built their success on your back and then pretended you were nothing more than a piece of furniture? Stick with me and I'll tell you exactly what I did. My story doesn't begin with bitterness. It begins with adoration, with the kind of pure, uncomplicated love a little girl has for a father who seems to hold the entire world in his head. My earliest memories are steeped in the scent of old books and pipe tobacco, the comforting clutter of his study a universe unto itself. Arthur Vance wasn't just my father. He was a weaver of worlds, a conjurer of characters who felt more real to me than some of my own relatives. I remember sitting on the floor by his heavy oak desk, my small legs tucked beneath me, listening to the rhythmic tap-tap-tap of his typewriter. It was the heartbeat of our house. He would read his first drafts aloud to me, his voice a low, melodic rumble that gave life to heroes and villains. He'd pause and look at me, a serious expression on his face. "What do you think, little owl? Does a man like that truly deserve redemption?" I was 7, maybe 8, but he treated my opinions with a solemn gravity that made me feel like the most important person in the world. He called me his little owl because he said I saw things in the dark that others missed. Back then I thought he meant the secrets in his stories. I didn't realize he was foreshadowing the secrets in his own life. We had rituals. Every Saturday, we'd go to a dusty, sprawling second-hand bookstore downtown. He'd give me $10 and set me loose, a treasure hunt for my own imagination. We'd meet an hour later at a small cafe, our spoils stacked between us, and he'd ask me to defend my choices. "Why this one, Cora?" he'd ask, pointing to a worn-out copy of a Gothic romance. And I'd explain the allure of the crumbling mansion on the cover, the haunted look in the heroine's eyes. He never judged my taste, which leaned toward the fantastical and the emotionally overwrought, so different from his own stark literary realism. Instead he listened, nodding, dissecting my childish analysis as if it were a scholarly thesis. "You have the instinct, kiddo," he'd say, ruffling my hair. "You have the narrative instinct." Those words were my crown jewels. They were proof that I was part of his world, that the magic flowing from his fingertips was somehow in my blood, too. I didn't just love him, I wanted to be him. I filled notebooks with my own clumsy stories, mimicking his style, desperate to earn that quiet nod of approval. The change was gradual, a slow chilling of the air that you don't notice until you can see your own breath. It started around the time I went to college. The typewriter fell silent. The desk grew dusty. His 5th novel, the much-anticipated follow-up to his breakout success, was stalled. The publisher was getting anxious. The advance had been spent. The pressure mounted and my father, the great Arthur Vance, began to shrink. He started drinking more, his evenings measured in scotch instead of pages. The study, once my favorite room, became a place of tension and misery. The air grew thick with his frustration, with the scent of stale whiskey and failure. He became irritable, distant. The man who had once dissected plot with me over coffee now barely grunted when I came home for the holidays. He was haunted by the blank page, and in turn our home became haunted by him. The first time he asked for my help, it was framed as a favor, a desperate plea cloaked in the language of collaboration. I was home for Christmas break during my junior year of college, where I was majoring in English literature, of course. I found him in his study late one night, slumped over his desk, a single pathetic paragraph typed on the screen of his new computer. The ashtray was overflowing. The bottle of Macallan was half empty. He looked up at me and for the first time I saw not a giant but a terrified old man. "I'm stuck, Cora," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Completely and utterly blocked. The well is dry." He ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. "I have this scene. A man has to tell his wife that their son died in a climbing accident. I can't find the words. It all sounds like sentimental garbage." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You were always so good at the emotional stuff. The gothic stuff you called it. Could you just take a look? See if you can unstick it for me? Just a fresh perspective." My heart ached for him. And beneath the ache, a secret, shameful thrill bloomed. The great Arthur Vance needed my help. It felt like an anointing. I spent the next 3 days locked in that study, fueled by coffee and a burning desire to please him, to fix him. I didn't just unstick the scene. I rewrote the entire chapter. I dug deep into the raw, messy core of grief, channeling all the melodramatic heroines of my youth. I wrote about the way a teacup rattles in a trembling hand, the sudden, unbearable weight of a winter coat, the silence that screams louder than any words. I left the file open on his computer and went back to my childhood bedroom, my heart pounding with a mixture of pride and fear. The next morning he came to my door. He didn't say much. He just looked at me with a kind of weary gratitude and said, "Thank you, little owl. You saved me." He hugged me, a real hug, the kind I hadn't gotten in years. In that moment I would have done anything for him. The Amber Tide was published 6 months later. It was hailed as a return to form, praised specifically for its newfound emotional depth and brave, unflinching look at human sorrow. In the acknowledgments he thanked his agent, his editor, and his publisher. My name wasn't there. When I asked him about it, my voice small, he looked almost surprised. "Oh honey, you know how much I appreciate it. It was our secret, wasn't it? Family thing. It would be unprofessional to include it." I was hurt, but I swallowed my disappointment. It was a one-time thing, I told myself. I had helped him over a hump. Now he would be himself again. I was wrong. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was the new beginning. For his next book, the request came sooner. He had the rough outline of a plot, a handful of character sketches, and nothing else. "I need you to flesh this out for me, Cora," he'd said over the phone, his voice already taking on the casual tone of a boss delegating a task. "Just get the first draft down and I'll do the polish." I was working a dead-end job at a coffee shop after graduation, my literature degree gathering dust. The offer to move home, to be paid a small stipend to assist him, felt like a lifeline. So I did it. I wrote the entire first draft. He changed a few sentences, added a few of his signature turns of phrase, and called it his. That book, A Covenant of Salt, was even more successful. It was nominated for the National Book Award. I watched him on television being interviewed by Charlie Rose, talking about his process, his inspiration. He said, "The characters, they just speak to me. I'm merely a conduit for their stories." I was sitting on the floor of my apartment eating a bowl of cereal for dinner and I almost choked. He was using the exact words I had written in my journal to describe my own creative process. He wasn't just stealing my words, he was stealing my soul. My friend Maya, who I'd known since my first day of college, was the only person who knew the truth. She was a fiery, no-nonsense journalist who saw the world in black and white, in bylines and credit where it was due. She was my anchor to reality when the gaslighting got too intense. We'd meet for cheap wine once a week and I'd vent my frustrations. "He can't keep doing this, Cora," she said one night, her dark eyes flashing with anger on my behalf. She slammed a literary magazine down on the table between us. It was open to a review of A Covenant of Salt. The critic was gushing about a particular passage, a complex, internal monologue of a young woman grappling with her faith. "This part," Maya said, tapping the page with a manicured finger. "I was with you when you wrote this. I remember you crying because you weren't sure you'd done the character justice. And now this pompous windbag is on a bestseller list because of it? It's theft. It's fraud. It's complicated, Maya," I'd argue, though my defense felt weaker each time. "He's my father. He's not well. The block is real." "Every writer gets blocked," she retorted. "They don't all turn their daughters into literary sweatshops. He has you trapped, Cora. You live in an apartment he pays for, you take his stipend. He's created a gilded cage and you're too scared to leave because you've never known anything else. What are you so afraid of? I didn't have an answer, but I knew. I was afraid of failing on my own. My father's shadow was so vast, I couldn't imagine finding any sun for myself. And worse, I was afraid that maybe he was right. Maybe I was just a good assistant, a talented mimic, but not a true artist. Maybe I could only create under the umbrella of his name, his concepts. The doubt was a poison he had been feeding me in small doses for years, and I had willingly swallowed every drop. The idea of striking out on my own was terrifying. Who would ever publish Cora Vance, the nobody? My father's fame was my shield and my prison, and I had no idea how to break free. The only thing I knew how to do was write. So I kept writing. For him. The decision to burn it all down began with a quiet, simmering rage. It wasn't a single explosive event, but the slow accumulation of 1,000 tiny cuts. It was hearing him on a podcast describe his writing day, a fictional routine of rising at dawn and wrestling with the muse, when I knew for a fact he hadn't written a creative sentence in nearly a decade. He spent his days answering fan mail and going to long, boozy lunches. I was the one rising at dawn. I was the one wrestling with the muse in my cramped apartment across town, the one whose fingers were stained with ink and whose back ached from hunching over a laptop. The latest novel, the one that was supposed to be his magnum opus, was titled Echoes in the Marrow. He'd come up with the title and nothing else. It's about legacy, Cora, he had announced grandly over one of our stilted monthly dinners. About the things we pass down whether we want to or not. A man discovers a dark secret about his grandfather, a celebrated town doctor. Run with it. That was the entirety of his creative contribution. Run with it. So I ran. I poured everything I had into that book. It was my best work yet, a dark, intricate story about a man slowly realizing that the pillar of his community, his own ancestor, was a monster. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I was writing about a hidden, shameful legacy while living one. Every word was a rebellion. Every chapter was a scream into the void. And as I wrote, a new, dangerous idea began to take root in my mind. It was born one night around 3 a.m. when the city was silent and my apartment felt like the loneliest place on earth. I was staring at his awards which he'd loaned me for inspiration, glinting on my bookshelf. They felt like mocking golden eyes. For years I had been seeking his validation, his approval. What if, I thought, I stopped seeking it and simply took it? What if I embedded a piece of myself into the work so deeply that it could never be removed? A signature he could never erase because he would never even know it was there. The plan was terrifying, exhilarating. It felt like stepping off a cliff in the dark, trusting that I would either fly or that the fall would be worth it. The final chapter of Echoes in the Marrow became my secret battleground. The protagonist, Thomas, finally finds his grandfather's hidden journal. The last entry is a cryptic, poetic confession, written in a strange, disjointed style. It was the perfect place to hide my own message. I decided on an acrostic. It felt literary, a trick worthy of the worlds my father claimed to build. It was a painstaking process. The sentences had to flow naturally, the prose had to be beautiful and haunting on its own, and yet the first letter of each line had to spell out my truth. I spent weeks on that single chapter, more time than I'd spent on any other part of the book. The first line began with its C. Crimson are the sins of the father staining the hands of the son. The next with an O. Only the quietest rooms hold the loudest truths. Then R. Regret is a hollow bone, a marrowless ache. And still the ghost watches from the corner of the room, her silence a story of its own. I continued, line by agonizing line. It was a dual act of creation and destruction. I was building a beautiful piece of literature while simultaneously planting the bomb that would blow it all up. The full message was my name followed by a confession. Cora Vance. I wrote this. He is a lie. The echo is mine. It was 34 lines of prose, my entire identity and rebellion compressed into a single elegant trap. When I was finished, I read it aloud. It was seamless. An editor might see it as an eccentric stylistic choice, a mark of artistic genius. No one would suspect its true purpose unless they were specifically looking for it. And I knew exactly who to guide toward that page. My secret weapon was Alistair Finch. He was the critic's critic, the most respected and feared voice in contemporary fiction. He was old school, a man who believed in the sanctity of the text, a literary detective who delighted in uncovering hidden structures and deeper meanings. I had met him once 2 years prior at the PN America Gala. My father had dragged me along as his glorified coat rack. During a lull, I had found myself standing near Alistair at the bar. He had just published a scathing review of a novel everyone else was praising, and I, in a moment of uncharacteristic boldness fueled by 2 glasses of cheap champagne, told him I agreed with his assessment. He turned his piercing blue eyes on me, intrigued. We spoke for 20 minutes about structuralism and the death of the author. He was sharp, engaging, and treated me like a peer. The illusion was shattered when my father clapped me on the shoulder. Alistair, I see you've met my girl Cora. My research assistant. An absolute godsend with the archives. The light in Alistair's eyes dimmed. I was no longer an interesting mind, I was staff. He gave me a polite, dismissive nod and turned his full attention to my father. The humiliation of that moment had stayed with me, a hot coal in my chest. Now it was time to use it. 3 weeks before the book launch, I went to a public library in a neighborhood I never frequent. I created a new, anonymous email address. My hands were trembling as I typed the message to Alistair. I kept it short and cryptic, designed to pique the curiosity of a man like him. Subject: a puzzle in echoes in the marrow. Mr. Finch. We spoke once at a pen gala about hidden structures. A shared interest. When you review Arthur Vance's forthcoming novel, you may find the final chapter particularly rewarding. It is a confession disguised as poetry. The author is not who you think he is. Look to the beginning of things. A well-wisher. I referenced our conversation to give the tip credibility, a hook he couldn't ignore. Then I signed it with a name that was both anonymous and a clue. Hitting send was the most definitive action I had ever taken in my life. I felt a wave of nausea followed by a profound, terrifying calm. The trap was set. All I had to do now was walk into the lion's den and wait for the door to spring shut behind him. The days leading up to the launch party were a blur of anxiety. I helped his publicist, a perpetually stressed woman named Genevieve, with the guest list and press kits. I moved through the preparations like a phantom, my mind elsewhere. My father was in his element, preening and boasting, soaking in the pre-publication buzz. He treated me with a sort of benign neglect, occasionally asking me to fetch him a coffee or print a document, utterly oblivious to the storm I was about to unleash. He thought I was a part of his machinery. He had no idea I was the bomb. The night of the launch was a quintessential New York literary event. It was held in a cavernous, high-ceilinged room in a trendy Soho art gallery. Champagne flowed like water, and the air hummed with the sound of forced laughter and intellectual posturing. I wore a simple black dress, feeling like a shadow against the vibrant backdrop of famous authors, agents, and critics, all of whom orbited my father like planets around a dying star. He was holding court near the entrance, a broad, disingenuous smile plastered on his face. He looked every bit the literary lion, with his silver hair and a bespoke tweed jacket that I knew had cost more than my entire security deposit. I kept my distance, nursing a single glass of Prosecco, my eyes scanning the crowd for Alistair Finch. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What if he didn't come? What if he'd dismissed my email as the ramblings of a crank? Then I saw him. He was standing near the back, observing the scene with a detached, almost clinical air. He hadn't seen me yet. A wave of relief so potent it almost made me dizzy washed over me. He was here. Phase 1 was complete. I tried to project an aura of calm, of being just another face in the crowd, but inside I was vibrating with a nervous energy that felt like it could power the entire city. My father, making his rounds, finally spotted me hovering by a bookshelf. He glided over, a prominent journalist in tow. "Ah, there she is," he boomed, slinging a heavy arm around my shoulders. The scent of scotch and expensive cologne enveloped me. "Walter, I want you to meet my secret weapon. This is my daughter, Cora." The journalist, Walter, gave me a polite, uninterested smile. "A pleasure. Are you a writer as well?" Before I could even open my mouth, my father laughed, a loud, dismissive sound. "Oh heavens no. This one's the brains of the operation. She's my research assistant. Fact-checker extraordinaire. Keeps the old man honest, Cora?" He gave my shoulder a patronizing squeeze. I'd be lost in the archives without her. An indispensable part of the team. He said the words research assistant with a particular emphasis, a subtle but clear demarcation of my place. I was not the artist. I was the help. The skilled laborer. Walter's eyes glazed over immediately, his professional interest vanishing. I was no longer a potential story, just an appendage to the great man. I felt the familiar heat of humiliation creep up my neck. I just smiled, a tight, brittle thing. I do what I can to help, I murmured. It was the last time I would ever say those words. That public dismissal, so casual and so complete, cemented my resolve. The guilt that had been gnawing at me vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He deserved this. He had earned every second of what was coming. Genevieve, the publicist, tapped a microphone. If everyone could take their seats, the Q&A is about to begin. The crowd shuffled towards a small makeshift stage where 2 plush armchairs were set up under a spotlight. My father took his place, looking regal and confident. I found a seat in the back row, right next to the wall, my chosen position for years. From the shadows, I had a perfect view of the stage, of Alistair Finch sitting in the 3rd row, and of the livestream camera with its blinking red light. My hands were cold and clammy. I clutched my small purse so tightly my knuckles were white. This was it. The point of no return. The Q&A started with the usual softballs. A fawning blogger asked about his inspiration. A student asked for advice for aspiring writers. My father answered with his well-rehearsed anecdotes, his charming, self-deprecating humor. He spoke of the solitude of the writer, the lonely struggle with the blank page. I felt a surge of bitter irony. His struggle was my struggle. His solitude was my late nights. He was performing the role of the artist while I, the actual artist, sat invisible in the back, my heart threatening to beat its way out of my chest. Each passing minute felt like an hour. I watched Alistair, but his face was impassive, unreadable. Did he understand? Was he going to do it? The fear that I had miscalculated, that this whole elaborate plan would result in nothing but my own private humiliation, was a physical weight in my stomach. Then Genevieve pointed to the 3rd row. Yes, the gentleman right there. Mr. Alistair Finch. A murmur went through the crowd. Alistair Finch asking a question was an event in itself. A production assistant handed him a wireless microphone. He stood up, a tall, imposing figure even in the dim light. The livestream camera swiveled to focus on him. He began with a polite preamble, his voice calm and measured, carrying easily through the silent room. Arthur, congratulations on another triumph. Echoes in the Marrow is a truly masterful work, dense and layered. My father beamed, preening under the praise from such a respected source. Thank you, Alistair. That means a great deal coming from you. I was particularly struck, Alistair continued, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more focused, more academic, by the final chapter. The journal entry. It's a stunning piece of prose, a departure from your usual style. Haunting, lyrical, almost abstract in its beauty. Ah, yes, my father said, nodding sagely. One must take risks. Push the boundaries of one's own comfort zone. He was leaning back in his chair, the picture of relaxed genius. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor. Then came the question. The one I had been waiting for, the one I had dreamed of and dreaded in equal measure. Alistair's eyes, even from a distance, seemed to find mine for a fleeting second. I'm fascinated by the structural conceit of that passage, he said, his voice ringing with clarity. And its thematic resonance. Could you, for us and for the audience watching at home, walk us through your thought process there? Specifically, your choice to begin each line with those particular letters. Seems to spell out a message, a kind of acrostic. It's quite intentional, isn't it? Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. My father's confident smile didn't just fade, it shattered. It was like watching a statue crack. He blinked, a slow, confused motion. The livestream camera, sensing drama, zoomed in tight on his face. I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip, even from the back of the room. The letters? He stammered, his voice a full octave higher than usual. He was stalling, his mind frantically searching for an answer he didn't have. He had clearly not read the final chapter with any real attention. Why would he? It was just my work. Yes, Alistair pressed gently but with the unyielding force of a tectonic plate. The first letters of each line. Seoraving. And it continues. I wrote this. It seems to be a confession, a hidden narrative. A bold artistic choice. I was hoping you could illuminate it for us. He said the name Cora Vance and looked directly at my father. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Every head in the room was now swiveling, trying to find the research assistant, who had been so casually dismissed just 30 minutes earlier. My father's face went from pale to a blotchy mottled red. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The charming, articulate literary lion was gone, replaced by a cornered, panicked old man. He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. Well, he began, his voice a weak croak. Art is often subconscious. A mystery even to its creator. The muse. She works in mysterious ways. It was the most pathetic, transparent bluff I had ever heard. The audience knew it. The silence in the room was no longer respectful. It was predatory. People were pulling out their phones, the small red lights of recording icons blinking in the dark like a swarm of fireflies. Alistair didn't let him off the hook. He held the microphone, his expression one of polite, academic inquiry, which only made the situation more brutal. So you're saying you wrote a complex, 34-line acrostic that spells out your daughter's name and a confession of authorial fraud entirely by accident? He asked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The question hung in the air, a perfectly polished guillotine. The camera was still tight on my father's face. He looked utterly, completely broken. He stared out at the audience, at the sea of faces, at the accusing red eye of the camera, and for the first time in a very, very long time he had no words. His legacy wasn't just unraveling. It was being publicly, methodically, and surgically dismantled by a question he could not answer. And in the back of the room, I, the ghost, the research assistant, the secret weapon, finally allowed myself to take a deep, steadying breath. The echo was mine. And now everyone knew it. The silence on stage stretched for an eternity, a thick, suffocating blanket. My father just sat there, frozen in the spotlight, his mouth slightly agape. Genevieve, his publicist, finally snapped into action. She rushed onto the stage, her face a mask of professional panic, and tapped my father on the shoulder. I'm so sorry everyone, she said into the microphone, her voice strained. Arthur is feeling a bit unwell. The excitement of the evening. We'll have to cut the Q&A short. Thank you all so much for coming. The livestream camera's red light blinked off. The spell was broken. A chaotic buzz erupted in the room. People were standing up, whispering furiously to each other, their faces a mixture of shock, glee, and disbelief. The literary world adores a success story, but it feasts on a spectacular downfall. Two stagehands helped my father out of his chair. He moved like an automaton, his eyes vacant. As they hustled him towards the backstage exit, his gaze swept the room and locked onto mine. The confusion in his eyes curdled into a look of pure, unadulterated fury and betrayal. I didn't flinch. I just held his gaze, my expression calm. I had expected this. I had prepared for it. He was led through a black curtain, and a moment later, Genevieve appeared at my side. Cora, she hissed, her fingers digging into my arm. He wants to see you. Now. I allowed her to pull me backstage. The contrast to the party was jarring. It was a cramped, poorly lit corridor cluttered with empty boxes and coiled cables. My father was leaning against a cinder block wall, his face ashen. The moment he saw me, he straightened up. What did you do? He rasped, his voice low and venomous. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. You did this. You planned this with him. That critic. For a moment, the old fear, the ingrained instinct to placate him, to make myself small, flickered inside me. But then I saw the truth in his eyes. There was no remorse. No shame. Only rage that he had been caught. My fear died, replaced by a profound, chilling calm. I said nothing. My silence was a wall he could not breach, and it infuriated him more than any argument could have. Answer me, he roared, taking a step toward me. After everything I've done for you, the apartment, the money. I gave you a career. You gave me a cage, I said, my voice quiet but steady. It was the first time I had ever truly spoken back to him. The words hung in the air between us, undeniable and true. His face contorted. You ungrateful little. He was cut off by the arrival of his publisher, A portly, powerful man named Julian Croft, whose face was pale with horror. "Arthur, what the hell is going on?" Julian demanded, ignoring me completely. "My phone is blowing up. Is it true? The acrostic? Did you not write the end of your own book?" My father couldn't answer. He just stared at me, his chest heaving. And in that moment I knew I was free. I turned my back on him, on Julian, on the whole sordid mess, and walked away. I pushed through the black curtain and back into the gallery, which was now in a state of pandemonium. No one noticed me leave. I was still invisible, but this time it was by choice. I walked out the main doors and into the cool, damp embrace of the New York night. The city air felt cleaner, lighter. I took a deep breath, and it felt like the first real breath I had taken in 10 years. My phone, which I had silenced, was vibrating incessantly in my purse. I pulled it out. Dozens of missed calls. Hundreds of text messages. The first one I saw was from Maya. It just said, "You did it. I'm buying all the champagne. Get over here." And then an email notification popped up. The sender was Alistair Finch. The subject line read, "A conversation." The body of the email was simple. "I believe you and I have a great deal to discuss, Ms. Vance. When you are ready." Ms. Vance. Not Cora. Not the assistant. Ms. Vance. I started to walk with no particular destination in mind, a small, genuine smile finally reaching my lips. The ghost was gone. The 6 months that followed were a whirlwind. The story of the Vances, father and daughter, became the biggest literary scandal in a generation. It was everywhere: the New York Times, the Guardian, Vanity Fair. They called it Acrostic Gate. Initially, my father and his publisher tried to spin it. They released a statement claiming it was a postmodern collaborative experiment that had been misinterpreted. No one bought it. Alistair Finch published a devastatingly precise article that not only laid out the evidence of the acrostic but also analyzed the stylistic schism in my father's work, pinpointing the exact novel where his voice had changed. The novel where I had first stepped in. Public opinion, once firmly in my father's corner, swung decisively against him. His publisher canceled the tour for Echoes in the Marrow and announced they were re-evaluating their relationship with him. His career was, for all intents and purposes, over. I stayed silent through all of it. On the advice of a lawyer Maya had connected me with, I gave no interviews and made no statements. Instead, I focused on what came next. I met with Alistair Finch for coffee. He was kind, respectful, and deeply apologetic for his initial dismissal of me at the gala. "Your father's greatest deception," he told me, stirring his espresso, "was not convincing the world he was a genius. It was convincing you that you were not." His words were a balm on a wound I hadn't realized was still so raw. He introduced me to his own agent, a formidable woman named Eleanor, who, after reading a short story I'd written in college, immediately offered to represent me. Which is how I found myself 6 months to the day after the launch party, sitting in a bright, airy corner office overlooking Bryant Park. I was in the headquarters of one of the most prestigious publishing houses in the world. Across the desk from me sat a senior editor, a woman my own age named Sarah, who had a fierce intelligence in her eyes. The contract for a 2-book deal was sitting on the table between us. My 2-book deal. My name, Cora Vance, was on every page. "We are so thrilled to be working with you, Cora," Sarah said, her smile genuine. "Your writing is extraordinary. That short story you sent was breathtaking. We see the scandal as a footnote, a fascinating backstory, but your talent is the real headline here. We want to know what story you want to tell next." I signed the contract with a hand that did not tremble. As I pushed the papers back across the desk, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a quiet, solid feeling of rightness. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. It wasn't about his fall. It was about my rise. My father called me that evening. It was the first time we had spoken since that night backstage. I almost didn't answer, but some lingering sense of obligation or perhaps just curiosity made me pick up. His voice was different. The booming, confident baritone was gone, replaced by the thin, reedy voice of an old man. "Cora," he said. There was a long pause. I saw the news. About your book deal. Congratulations." "Thank you," I said, my voice neutral. "I suppose you're happy now," he said, a trace of his old bitterness creeping in. "You got what you wanted. You destroyed me." "I never wanted to destroy you," I replied, and it was the truth. I just wanted to exist. I wanted my own voice. He was silent for a long time. I could hear the faint sound of ice clinking in a glass. I was so afraid, he finally whispered, and the confession in that whisper was more real than any of his public statements. After your mother died, the words, they just stopped. The well went dry just like I told you. I was terrified everyone would find out I was a fraud, a one-hit wonder. And then you were so brilliant. It was so easy to take what you wrote and call it mine. Started as a temporary fix and it became my life. I was a coward. He didn't apologize, not really. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He just laid out his own pathetic truth. He asked if there was a way back, a way for us to fix things. I thought of all the years of silence, of dismissal, of being made to feel small. I thought of the future stretching out before me, a blank page that was finally mine to fill. I forgive you, I said, and I meant it for my own sake. Forgiveness was a key to my own cage. But I can't have you in my life right now. I need to do this on my own. I need to be my own person. Setting that boundary was the hardest and most necessary thing I had ever done. He didn't argue. He just said, I understand, and the line went dead. My journey has been a strange and painful one, but it brought me here to this moment of clarity. For years I believed that my value was tied to his recognition, that my talent was only real if he validated it. The greatest lesson I learned is that your worth is not determined by the people who refuse to see it. It is an intrinsic part of you, a quiet fire that burns whether anyone else feels its warmth or not. Sometimes, the people who underestimate you the most are inadvertently giving you the greatest gift, the space to build a version of yourself they could never have imagined. So, to everyone listening, I want to leave you with this thought. Don't let anyone else tell your story for you. Your voice is yours alone and it deserves to be heard. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had to fight to reclaim a part of yourself that someone else tried to take? Share your story because every story shared makes us all feel a little less alone. Please don't forget to like this video if my experience resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my journey. I hope it inspires you to honor your own. Remember, you are the author of your own life. Make it a masterpiece.